Elevation Station, 132 Waldoboro Road in Jefferson, Maine. We have premium medicinal cannabis and accessories to get you on track. Elevation Station, 132 Waldoboro Road in Jefferson, Maine. All aboard!
Hi again, everyone. Welcome to Vintage Racers Roundtable. This is Ken Minot from the Maine Vintage Race Car Association, also the general manager and promoter of Wiscasset Speedway. And on behalf of MVRCA, Lincoln County TV, and our participating sponsors, we want to welcome you again to this latest edition of Vintage Racers Roundtable. It's the next installment in a series of programs that we gather together some of the legendary racers in the state of Maine and share some stories, and we've got some good ones today, and glance in the rearview mirror of their remarkable careers. We're here at the LCTV studios today. Once again, want to thank Larry Seidlinger and his entire staff for hosting us today. Our special guests for today's show are three more Hall of Fame drivers, these guys coming out of the Midcoast area. Lots of wins, lots of championships, and lots of stories. We've had a lot of them going on before the cameras even started rolling. My co-host once again, as always, my partner in crime here, Pete Silva. Pete, we're in for it today.
Yeah, it feels like a crime now that you mention it. Should be fun.
So Pete's here to help us draw some of these stories out of these guys, and we'll go around the table and introduce them. I've got a multi-time champion and Maine Motorsports Hall of Famer, class of 2019, Dale Chadbourne, also a member of the Wiscasset Speedway Hall of Fame. In the middle, well, we found out last time that you're the wild man from Waterville. We've got the car salesman from Cushing over here in the middle, Chuck LaChance, multi-time champion and member of the Wiscasset Speedway Hall of Fame, class of 2021.
And now vintage.
And now vintage. Welcome. And then on the end here, we have multi-time champion, Wiscasset Speedway Hall of Famer, and Maine Motorsports Hall of Famer, class of 2016, Kenny Wright. Welcome, all you guys, and what do you think?
I'm honored to be here with some of the people that I've always looked up to in racing. So
wouldn't have missed it.
We're going to get into some good stories here and look back in your careers like we mentioned. So as I always do, let's start around the room and just familiarize people with who you are and how you got started in racing. You got some pretty cool stories. So Dale, why don't we start with you? I know your story, but tell the folks on camera.
What gave you the desire to want to race?
I noticed one day there was a race car that started up down the street, and I got on my bicycle and tried to find it. It took me 3 or 4 different trips before I got all the way to where the race car was because they kept shutting it off. And after a while, I found out it was Del Stinson's car.
Go ahead. I'll get back to that after.
Yeah, but you didn't have any particular background. You said you were a farm kid, so you didn't have any background in racing. Nobody in your family?
When I was very young, my father had lung issues, so they moved us to Arizona, and we was right in Phoenix, and there were racetracks all around Phoenix. I mean, any day of the week you wanted to go watch a race.
They used to do that winter heat on television from out there, didn't they? In Phoenix International Speedway or Raceway or something. Yeah, that's right.
It was a big thing. Point. You know, racing was huge out there, and we were new to the area. We didn't know anybody, so we went racing.
And you just started hanging around with Delmer and managed to talk yourself onto his crew?
Yeah, well, there was the car he ran, they always cut the input shafts on the transmissions, on those little transmissions they ran in the Chevrolets. And to change the transmission, they had to take the cover off the transmission. Well, none of those guys were small enough to get in the car to get at the bolts to take the cover off. So they needed a little guy. Well, I didn't weigh 80 pounds hardly back when I was a kid. So after I started going down there and hanging out, they'd take me to the races with them back at Dell's panel truck, stuff me down inside a stack of slicks.
I was going to say that they had an age limit in the pits at Beechridge at the time, and it was kind of funny how they used to sneak you into the track.
Yeah, right down inside a stack of slicks. And when they'd get in through the gate, they'd come back from getting the stamp on their hand. I'd stick my hand out like that, and they'd take theirs and roll it on top of it. And it didn't take a brain surgeon. Forget I was only 14 years old, you know. Nobody cared.
I was amazed when I read that you I mean, I was a Dell Stinson fan. We, you know, in the 70s, we raced at Unity on a Saturday night, and the Ridge ran tons of races on Sundays, and he was one, other than Homer and Walsh and Human, that grew, and Cusack, and but Dell was one of my favorites. He used to come to Unity. I was blown away when I saw you helped him at 14 or 15 years old.
Some of the trips back from Unity were scary.
Yeah, I bet.
The roads weren't nothing back then.
Yeah, whole different era for sure.
Yeah, him and Dave Kaler.
Yeah, I don't know if I know him. But
20,
I don't.
is Dell still with us?
No, he passed away last year.
Yeah.
Now, you had, it's probably not enough time to share all the stories you've had about adventures to and from the racetrack. We've heard lots of great ones about losing cars off trailers and cars hitting houses, and you proved that the house was too close to the road and stuff.
I didn't do it. The guys that knew what they were doing tried to prove that,
Yeah. So then how did you yourself get into racing? You built an engine in your parents' bed, in your bedroom at the house, unbeknownst to you
We lived in an old farm, and upstairs, well, you know where it was, Fred.
Oh, yeah.
I'd bring pieces in, a piece at a time. You know, the biggest piece was the block. You know, I was
Well,
a
you still
teenager
got to
at the
carry
time.
it. I mean, it doesn't walk by itself upstairs.
I lugged it up the stairs, the block.
Hiding it from your mother.
Oh, nobody was there when I took it up. Took it up the stairs, and then the rest of the pieces were real easy.
Fear's a heck of a motivator, isn't it?
Absolutely. Oh, you didn't know my mother. Oh, you did.
I know it very well.
Yeah. Watched her throw a guy right out through the front door one night.
Yeah. But so you finally got yourself onto the racetrack. Was it a Unity? When
I
you
started with
racing?
Cassett. I drove Dell's car around Beach Ridge once or twice when I was a kid.
Geez, that was a modified. That must have been exciting.
Well, it had no power steering. I mean, I was a kid, a little kid.
Yeah.
You know, even a teenager, I was still small. And turn that wheel.
Big tires. Big tires, yes.
Yeah. Oh, the left front wasn't. It was only that big around. But
Now, Chuck, what got you into racing? And your story is kind of interesting, and I found out a little more about you when we put you in the Wiscasset Speedway Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame worthy career for sure, but you started a lot later than most people do racing. What
Yeah.
were you in your 30s when you started racing?
Yeah, I was 32 or 3 when I started racing, but I always knew I wanted to race. You know, back in school, I can remember middle school, what they called junior high at the time. When you first started having study halls, everybody would be doing their homework, and I'd be drawing race cars and race tracks and all stuff going on like that. And then as a teenager in high school, this chicken farmer moved in about 1.5 miles from us, and there was this beautiful race car out there that I just drooled over and thought that was awesome, and that was Doug Ripley, the flying chicken farmer.
Yeah.
And so we got really interested in that. My brother Scott hung around down there all the time, and I really wanted to race. I really had the bug bad, and when I had my own car, we used to go to Wiscasset Friday night and Unity Saturday night, and if there was a race at Oxford on Sunday, we were there.
Yeah,
and
wherever you could go.
I said to my dad at the time, you know, I was 18, 19 years old. I go, if I started putting a race car together, would you help me out? Because he was sponsoring Dougie's car. And he says, you'll never make a race car driver. You know, if you were your brother Scott, he says that you could do it. But I only, you know, when I graduated.
Did you use that as motivation?
I think I never really thought about that until Pete said that to me the other night, and we were talking about that I think probably when I did finally get racing, that motivated me.
A lot of incentive right there.
Yeah,
to prove 'em wrong.
yeah, there was.
Yeah.
And at that point, I really wanted to prove myself, and I knew I could drive. I was hell on wheels. If my folks had known the way I drove on the highway, they might have taken my car away. But anyhow, it was, you know, when that happened, I kind of went on with life. I started working for my dad. We used to go to work first thing in the morning, work till dark all summer long. Anyhow, so I wouldn't have had time for a race car, and you get married and start a family and whatever. And then Scott got in a little trouble with drugs and ended up in the correctional center for 3 months. And my dad at the time got Dougie Ripley to pipe up a Camaro for him, and I put a motor together for it and started going back to the racetrack with him. So after going to the racetrack, I got an enduro car and went to an enduro race at Wiscasset to start with. That was my first race then. I think I finished 8th, and we started 3 cars wide, 3/4 of the way around that track. And it was a blast. I thought it was awesome. So anyhow, after that, Bobby Moon offered me the chance to drive his car. And I said, well, I'd love to drive it. I'd love the opportunity to drive it, but only if I can split the cost of racing it with you. So he jumped at that. And so that's how I ended up racing. But I was 32 or 33 years old before we finally got in a race car.
But what was your second race? It was a chain race.
Oh yeah,
Let's hear about the chain race.
So the second enduro we went to, it was a chain race at Unity, and it was raining when we first got up there, and we thought they were going to call it off. Well, they decided to race.
Now, for people who haven't seen a chain race, tell them.
Well,
what that
so
involves.
they put a 10, 12, maybe a 15-foot chain between the two cars. And my brother Scott and I were there, and this Mercury Monarch that I had a 302 in it, but it was only running on 7 cylinders, dead cylinder. And I said to my brother Scott, I says, I can hold that wide open. And he had a great big Plymouth Satellite or some damn thing that they disabled. And I said, and I got thinking about this, and I said, when I want to go, I'm going to go like this, and you just, let's go. And if I want you to slow down, I'll go like this. And I held that thing wide open the whole time. The brakes were smoking on that when we were done, but we ended up winning the race with it.
Your first taste of victory.
Yeah. But there was a funny thing that happened, too. David Folsom was very innovative with his racing, and he had a Chevelle, and they got a little Renault Lacar that they were towing behind it because he thought it'd be really fast that way. And we came off turn 2, and I can remember that Lacar going down over the dirt banking and shooting back up across the track about 10 feet in the air.
The Renault?
Oh, yeah.
It's just swinging back there like a...
It was too light.
Yeah,
But
no
you
kidding.
see some really funny things
kidding.
racing then.
Well, we'll get into some more of your career as well here. But Kenny, you started pretty young yourself,
Did,
right in
really.
high school, right?
Yeah, back in, well, this guy over here is the one that got me into it. They decided to come down and build a racetrack in back of my house.
I wanted to ask you guys about
Yeah,
that.
it's talking about it today. I don't know if it was 78 or 79.
You were about 14 years old, weren't you?
I was
just
about
at
14,
mid-teens,
13,
yes.
14. Yeah, that started the whole thing off right
What did
there.
they call that place?
The
Harley Wright 500.
The Harley 500.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, it was across the stream, dirt track. We used to go up there and beat around 67 Bel Air. I mean, anything, if it would run, you drove it.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you'd be covered with dirt, and there's a stream right there, so that's how you washed up. So it worked out really well.
Even if it was the stream that fed Nequasit Lake, which is the water,
right.
the drinking water source.
I'm sure there's a lot of EPA things that were violated back then.
Probably doing a little flavoring.
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun.
But now, back in the mid 80s, Wiscasset was closed.
It was around that time it
Yeah.
was closed. I
And
think
you
next
probably
year
couldn't
it
get up to
opened
Unity.
up, 1980, I believe.
When it
That's the
reopened.
year Chuck, Jimmy, they threw some street stocks together because I took Chuck's car out. I wasn't old enough to drive, but I took it out in a practice, blew the motor up, and I went and looked at Dad and I said, next year I'm having one.
Yeah.
And that kind of got it all, the racetrack down back at the start.
And you had pretty early success too. You won a street stock championship your first full year in a race car.
The first year, 81, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Won a race and then, won the championship.
Were you like a sophomore in high school at the time?
I think I was a sophomore.
Yeah.
No kidding, still a teenager.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, Bill Cost was my math teacher, and he was the announcer at the racetrack. So it's kind of a small world then.
All right, we'll start here.
Uh-oh.
You and I started about the same year. I think it was the same year Noah was building the Ark.
Yeah, mine sunk.
You had a heck of a driving career. You won about 70 races or so. And then you did something that most people don't do. You stopped racing and started mentoring all these other people. And from what I read, every one of them's gone on to win championships and races, dozens of races. What brought that on for you to just stop driving and go do that, besides money?
Well, you're my age, so you know that as you get older,
I'm older.
things don't work the way they used to.
Amen to that.
And right now, racing would be completely off the table. So,
But how old were you when you quit? I mean, it had to be a little while ago for this many people to have that much success under your tutelage.
You came back for a little bit and raced with Adam.
yeah, the heavyweights.
Yeah, and your son
won a
Adam.
championship then.
Yeah, with the
So it was
heavyweight demons.
01, 02, something like that, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, 01 driver championship. Is it called a Demon division?
Yeah, heavyweight demons, a basic
Oh, yeah.
entry-level street stock,
Yeah.
and that was quite a class.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Had you two guys, you and Adam, the Pierpont brothers, and Mark Woodman, Albert Westhaver. People for an entry-level class, it got a lot of attention.
Yeah, it did. People stand up when we came on the track.
You've got John Force championship numbers here. 15 John Force, the drag race.
Yeah, I tried that drag racing
At
thing.
least 15 championships. I me's got to feel. I can't imagine how gratifying that must be. Not to only do it yourself, but with your son and these other people. Is it Merle Grover? That wouldn't be Buster Grover's.
Brother.
No way.
Yeah, I was married to his daughter at the time.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yep.
Buster Grover was one of the first people I watched. One of the first nights I was starting to race. I was in a '57 Chevy at Unity, and they started me at about 30th. That was to save the field, obviously. And Buster was in front of me, and I said, well, I'll just follow Buster through traffic. He was on people's tires. He was up in the air, and the tires were leaving marks halfway up the door and stuff. And I got halfway through that race watching Buster, and I said, I don't really know if I want to do this anymore. Man, he was tough.
Oh, yeah, he was.
He's one of this year's inductees into the Hall of Fame.
I think that's great. I think he's kind of one of the unforgotten guys that was in the beginning when it was rough and tumble, and he sure lived up to the part. But he won races everywhere.
Yeah, and with Merle, you crew chief for him, and
I built his cars, and when I started with him, he was running Kelly Moore's old car, '64 Chevelle.
Really?
And he was stumbling a little bit, so I started working with him and got to know his daughter a little bit.
So Buster's wife was a heck of a racer too, or something,
Elaine.
wasn't she?
yeah, Elaine, she and Buster went into the Wiscasset Hall of Fame
Yeah.
together.
Oh, that's right.
She was
Yeah,
one of
that's
the
good.
first women to race head-to-head with the guys. She would sneak in and jump in the car and go outrace them. And
Yeah, Steve Pellerin talks about her a lot. He
Yeah, she was
speaks
one of
very
the
highly of her.
pioneers,
Yeah. That's great that she got put in the Hall of Fame. I think Steve would like to see her in the Maine Hall of Fame.
yeah,
Great.
for sure.
So you started slow,
Me?
small motors, good handling cars. Your first car, who built that? You built it yourself, or did that come from stands also?
And that was Bobby Moon had the car already.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
The Long John 100. Dave St. Clair ran that car the year, but I don't know who Dave got that car from. But Bobby got that car from him, and that was the first car that I raced. And we started at Wiscasset. The idea was we were going to race at Wiscasset. I think it was Penny Roy had the track at that time, and we raced a few times down there, and they closed the track. So we ended up going to Unity, and when we first went to Unity, I was terribly intimidated by that track. I was, narrow and rough and all that
Compared
stuff.
to Wiscasset, you mean?
No, not Wiscasset, Unity.
But I mean, had you already been to Wiscasset?
Yeah, we'd been to Wiscasset. The first 100 lapper that I raced at Wiscasset, I finished third, but only because our car was still running. I think only 4 cars finished that race.
But Unity intimidated you because of the difference. It was more confined and
it was
restricted.
narrow and
Yeah.
it was rough and
Yes.
it was,
For sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
No
it didn't
wall,
take long
no
to get
walls
used
to
to
keep
it.
you on the track.
I wanted to race, so it didn't matter.
Well, you did pretty well there. My word.
Once you get into late models, and you were pretty much a Ford guy. You are a Ford guy anyway, right?
Yeah, I was indoctrinated into Ford when I was young. My grandfather was a Ford mechanic at Waldoboro Ford, so he always had Ford. So I was a Ford man right from the start. That Bobby had the Chevrolet, and that's what I had the opportunity to race.
If you were
So
hanging
that's
around
what we
Ripley's,
did.
that would have been a Ford deal too back then.
But yeah,
Around
everyone
Doug.
remembers you from the KDT towing.
Yeah,
Ford Thunderbird.
that's when I moved into Pro Stock, was with KDT Towing, and Stan was instrumental in that. We were racing the Limited, and KDT was looking for a driver. Their driver was wrecking the car quite often the year before, and they were looking for a driver, and there wasn't really any Pro Stock drivers available, and they asked Stan about it, and Stan said, if I was you, this is a guy I'd talk to, Chuck LaChance. So they called me up, and I ended up going with them. Started out with a number 9. Obviously,
Right.
Doug Ripley ran the 9. I wanted to run the 9. I was always a huge Bill Elliott fan. He was a 9, and our first car was kind of painted like Bill Elliott's in that theme. But I was working at Rockland Ford, and they knew that I was racing, and the manager of the Westbrook branch wanted to sponsor the race car. So when we went to Pro Stock, he said, if you change to a Ford, we'll sponsor you. And so I talked with Kevin and Dennis, would you go with a Ford? If I paid for the motor, you already had the car, but if I paid for the motor, would you go Ford? And they said, absolutely. And that's how we ended up with a Ford. And Elton Sawyer at the time was running the Busch South Series and running the Ford credit car, and that's where the paint scheme came from originally, and the 38, because that's what he wanted us to do if we'd do it.
Yeah.
Did Bob Bailey build that motor for you?
Bob Bailey built that engine. Yeah, so Butler McMaster, for some reason, Kevin and Dennis said they didn't seem to be interested in building the Ford engine, and somebody told them to call Bob, and they called Bob and says, well, it's just an engine, I'll build it for you.
Yeah.
So we were a little late getting the engine. So what they did at first, we took my Limited Sportsman and just put big tires on it. For the first 5 or 6 races that year, we ran my Limited as a Pro Stock. And we almost won a race at Bangor with it. We finished second to John Fitt.
You did end up winning Rookie of the Year in Pro Stocks,
yes,
right?
I did. And I think Most Improved Driver that year, too.
Was that all SVO stuff from Ford?
Yes, we couldn't find a block. And so I called Dave Dion, which I knew I had introduced myself to Dave a few years before that down at the Oxford 250. And I called Dave because we couldn't, I think it was R&D development, was Ford's.
Him and his brothers were doing some of that stuff.
Yeah,
for Ford.
so I called Dave, and Dave says, well, R&D down in North or South Carolina, he says, I know they have 2 blocks down there. Call them up and tell them that I told you you could have one.
Yeah, nice.
And so that's how we ended up getting the block.
Yeah, I think they were doing the V6 Ford program there a little bit back then. Mm-hmm. Yeah, did a lot of R&D for Ford.
Yeah. But I'll say one thing, that engine from Bob, I was really impressed the first time I drove that car with the Ford, with the Ford engine in it. Because usually you get a little bit of vibration with any engine, even if it's balanced really well and all that stuff. Went down the backstretch and looked up in the mirror, and that mirror was just as steady as looking at you two here. It was really good.
I ran some of Bob's stuff to go to Martinsville and the Oxford. It ran good.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I used to, his engines, I'd run them for 3 years without freshening them. We couldn't afford to freshen them, so we ran our motors a lot.
So between 86 and 94, you won at least 34 Limited Sportsman races. That's a nice little roll.
Yeah, and kind of a good shoe in the 100 lappers. You won, what, 400 lappers in a row?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, in 93 and 94.
Do you think that suited your style? You've always been known as kind of a smooth, calculated driver.
I really like the longer races. It really suited my style. I didn't care if somebody passed me early in the race. Yeah. I don't know who was it said, but to finish first you have to finish.
Yep.
Yeah, you always struck me as a patient driver, which is tough.
I had it right on the dash of every race car I had. Be patient, be smooth, drive fast.
Yeah.
Well, you must like winning races in a row. You won 6 in a row at Unity in 92.
I did.
Then the following year, that same year, you won 10 at Wiscasset. Unbelievable. 2 Wiscasset Speedway Limited Sportsman Championships, 4 Wiscasset Speedway 100s, and those were all in a row. They were 100.
Yeah, 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
And you were racing against Chubbuck and Ripley, Darren Ripley back then?
Oh, yeah, Kevin Durgan, Pee Wee Knight,
Pee Wee Knight was
Larry
always down there.
Gelanis. I mean, a lot of the Beach Ridge cars were coming up at that time. And we were starting 28 or 30 cars every week back then, so...
Well, you must have been pretty solid and consistent, because Ken Lane sent me some information just as we were walking in here. You won a race every year for 16 seasons, at least.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Right, they talk about that stuff on Sunday afternoons there with the cup people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
My second year racing at Unity, out of 21 races that year, I finished in the top 3 18 times.
Yeah.
I've got a picture of the car with the trophies all on the top of it.
Nice.
So how many different tracks have you gone to? I mean, did you primarily just stay at Wiscasset, or did you go to the Ridge, Oxford, Unity?
I ran the little guys up to Oxford.
Yeah.
But when Wiscasset would close, we'd go to Unity.
Yeah.
I took my modified to Bangor. I guess Beech Ridge is the only one I haven't raced on.
Okay, when you say modified, are you talking about an old style modified or a new style modified?
Like a past style mod.
Past style, okay.
The past mods actually started at Wiscasset when
Yes.
Tom Mayberry ran Wiscasset for 1 year in 2003 and started what is now the past mods there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember that. I wasn't living here then, but I remember that. So that's why I asked the question. Yeah, those things are popular.
Yes.
They're fun.
I know they put a couple of show on at Wiscasset.
Yeah.
Got some nice young drivers too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, Adam's doing quite well there too.
I'd say so.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. Can't forget this guy over here in the corner, Kenny. You can't hide from us.
So, I mean, obviously, you were tremendously successful in the street stock division. You won championships. The limited sportsman, you won championships. Pro stocks, you won championships. What got you each time to move up? I mean, what point did you realize it was, especially to the pro stock division?
Pro stock was, we had to stay and build a new cab in 90.
Pro stock or limited?
Limited.
Okay.
I bought it with the idea that the following year we wanted to step up to pro stock.
So it could be converted, just updated. Yeah,
Absolutely.
nice
Had
thinking.
stock, I'd had a Nova clip on it. So we looked at staying at the end of that 90 season, going into 91. We cut it off, coilovers it. Stan said, put the big springs on, I'll put the right spindles on it, and start out that way. Well, at the time, Mitch Hayden was getting out of pro stocks, wanted to go back and run LMS. So we basically just swapped everything, all the suspension pads.
He was working for Stan probably
He
then too,
did at
wasn't
the
he?
time. He just basically, I think it was that year or the next, he went back on his own.
Yeah,
So we just swapped basically the car over and had Stan upgrade it.
yeah.
And he said, honestly, you can be just as competitive as that as building a brand new car. So
Well, you got the hang of that pro stock deal. I mean,
Fast.
between 100 lappers and 150 lappers, you won 5 or 6 of those. I mean, that's nothing easy to do, winning that many of those.
Right.
So what brought you to the point of stepping up to the NEPSA Tour?
that was interesting because come 95, at that time, and trying to run a cab, and basically by then it was on my own. So I was paying all the bills. Sponsors were great help, don't get me wrong, and the guys on the crew were awesome. I wouldn't be anywhere without those guys. But the finances, buy a home, I had already had one daughter, another one on the way. I'm like, something's got to give. Yeah. So at the time I talked with Bub Raven, and Jimmy was all done, and I was going to run his car. And I said, no problem, we'll line something up. Well, the deal kind of fell through. Bub said, as much as you want to run, there's no way I can run that much in the season. And I said, okay, but what do you want to run? He goes, honestly, I think I'll just drive the car a few times. I said, no problem, Bub's a great guy.
Yeah, he is.
Well, then, I call Stan up and I go, what are we going to do next year? Which would have been for the 96 season. And Stan said, Wayne Ferguson's looking for a driver.
Yeah.
And then the phone calls were made, and I took a ride down to Woodstock, Vermont, and Wayne hired me to drive the 3-car for the next 3 or 4 years.
So that worked out good.
Yeah, a lot of these seem to
Did
be
really well in that car.
meeting the right people at the right time.
Oh, yeah,
Just
timing.
all by chance, Pete. You probably know that better than anybody
I've
in
been
here.
saved
Just-
more times
Yeah.
by timing and just being in the right place and running into the right person.
Yeah.
Nothing planned.
Right.
I mean, you have to plan things, but sometimes the best things are just accidental.
Right.
Thankfully, especially in the racing game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the
Absolutely.
NEPSA Tour was the tour that kind of kicked everything off and kind of developed into what is now the PASS Tour, right?
Right. Well,
Ralph is the one that started the NEPSA Tour.
Yeah,
Ralph,
because
Mike,
the ACT Tour, I wanted to race ACT. So in 95, the first year in the Pro Stock, we went to Oxford, the last race of the season, and ran an ACT race. And then they shut down that year. They went back to like a late model chat instead of a Pro Stock. And that's then NEPSA. So we ran NEPSA after that.
I was wondering how you got into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell
Kinda
you,
forced into
Kevin and Dennis were awesome with the car. They were really good with the car. They knew how to make it go and handle. And I could tell them what was going on. They'd make some adjustments. I wouldn't tell them what to do, but the car would go.
Did Dick Bilal drive that car a few times before you drove it?
No.
at Unity?
He might have the year before. I don't know. Mark Matthews was driving the car basically before I started driving it.
Because I was home for something. Maybe
Dick Bilal was really good friends with Kevin and Dennis. So.
Yeah, I think I showed up one night and he was there, and my father and brother were up there. I don't know what the night was. I was living in North Carolina, and Dick came over and said, "You want to drive my car?" Sure. What's going on?
Yeah.
He said, "They want me to drive this car." He won the race and I ran second.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But I think it's the guys you were talking about. That car was a good car.
Yeah, it was a good car.
Obviously, you had success in it.
Yeah. Yeah, Stan told him that, I'd be a good driver for the car because I wouldn't wreck it. I was good on equipment, stuff like that. So
I still think the mid to late 90s, the NEPSA Tour, the Sizzler, and a lot of the Opens you guys were running at the time was one of the great heydays of top tier racing. I mean, just a who's who of Hall of Fame level drivers. The two of you, Stan, Ralph, Scott Chubbuck, Larry Pottle, all those guys. It's amazing that the roster you could read through.
A lot of fun racing with all those guys.
Exactly.
Yeah. There was
Jim McCallum was another one.
Absolutely. But so I was on the board of directors of NEPSA, but Dick Belisle, Bill Chick, Gary Smith, but I don't remember Ralph being part of it.
I thought he had something to do with starting it.
Yeah.
He might have had something to do with starting it, but it wasn't. But
Mike Rowe.
Who's that?
Ralph and Mike Rowe got that started.
Yeah.
Then we had that meeting down at DeMillo's, I believe it was.
Right.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of threw in, and then I know Bill had a lot to do with it.
Bill Chick and Gary Smith worked very hard at that.
They did,
the NEPSA tour. They were the ones that were running around trying to set up the races.
How did you end up getting hooked up with Bill Chick to drive his car?
After 3 years with Wayne, we won the championship. I believe that was '98. '99, Buzzy was, I think, looking at another avenue. Doug approached me.
Buzzy Bazanson?
Buzzy Bazanson. And Doug had approached me down at Seekonk, Mass. And he goes, "Is this something you're interested in?" I go, "If you got an empty seat, yeah." Because I'd already filled in a couple times that season, which is kind of ironic because the race we went down and run in Seekonk was on a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
This is with their late model. Motors ahead in it. It's basically the show cat. Well, at the end of 100 laps, we ran out of fuel once. The only thing I didn't break on the car was the roof and the rear window. That thing come in and it sounded like some kind of Transformers. I mean, every body panel was dragging. And I drive up and I look at behind and I go, "There's no way in hell they'll ever call me back for another run a car again." And they were so happy. I think we got 4. And they were like, "Oh, that was an awesome race." I'm like, "Oh my God." I got out. I was even embarrassed to look at it.
And then how many years did you drive for them after that?
Another 5 years after.
Yeah.
Wow.
Bill Chick was an awesome person.
Oh, they were sweetheart people.
Yeah.
Bill and Barbara, I miss them. They're both gone now, unfortunately. But, they were just great people.
I know you two obviously have driven against each other. Did you ever race against these guys?
Oh, I raced with Kenny.
Yeah. I've never raced against Dale.
Yeah.
But
Thank God.
I raced a lot against Kenny. Kenny put me on a very quick learning curve when I first started because he was in the limited division and he was one of the guys you needed to run with.
Yeah.
You had some good times in a limited division. When you were still in that division is when I was coming home and George was sick.
Yeah.
You were doing a heck of a job.
Yeah, they were great guys to race with. That whole division, they were all great guys. We had a great time.
You talk about, and Ken mentioned it, you laying back in the long races, but hell, you did that in a regular race.
Yeah, I did.
You'd always let it kind of thin out and get in line, and then you would take off. It was obvious what you were doing to anybody that knew anything about racing. It was pretty impressive.
You had to let people beat themselves.
Yeah.
And then late in the race is when you started making your moves.
But you did it enough, people were looking forward to it, waiting for the field to thin out and watch you make your charge because it was the same thing. I'm sure it was at Wisconsin too.
Yeah.
I saw it mostly at Unity, but pretty impressive.
I wasn't a splashy driver. I wasn't.
I remember a quote I read. Ken Lane posted something on our club Facebook page a couple of days ago. It was a newspaper article, an interview with you and your son, and I remember the headline: "I'm not here to race for points. I'm here to win races," or something like that.
Yeah. But Stan Reserves told me at one time, and I kind of took it as an insult at the time. Stan says, "You're a great points racer."
Yeah.
I
think it suited your style more.
What it amounted to is I had to race smart because I couldn't afford to wreck the car, because if we wrecked the car, I didn't have the money to fix it. So a lot of times I'd back out of a situation where a lot of people, if they didn't have to worry about that, they wouldn't have.
But you learned a lot doing that, and that's probably why somebody asked you to drive a car moving forward.
Right.
In Kenny's case, I'm not sure.
The money difference between third and fourth wasn't enough to take that chance.
Yeah. I got to get back to you, and I wanted you to talk about the early days of the Charger division. You were, that was kind of new when you jumped into those cars.
Very new.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a new class, and I'm always about trying to find something new to do.
Yeah, and that's one of your favorite cars to race in. Don't you still have one of them?
I got 2 of them.
Yeah.
I got my first car and I got my second car.
And who are some of the guys that you raced against back
Well, one
then?
of them was Bobby Moon.
Yeah.
He ran that 9 car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was that was only in the mini division, wasn't it?
No, that was in the Charger class.
Was it in the he did have
had a
you're
Chrysler
right.
product.
I forgot that. That's
Yep.
right.
This in the 70s or late 60s?
Oh, a long time ago.
Early 70s.
It had to have been in the 70s.
Early 70s.
Yeah, because Bobby and I
Early
went to high school
mid-70s.
together, and I graduated in 71.
You still get the 55 or 57 Chevy you raced?
Yep.
No way.
Yeah,
Absolutely do. You drive up my driveway, they're sitting right there.
I'm impressed.
this will buy it today.
I got 4 of my old race cars.
Get the 55 too? Time to break those out, isn't it? And do a little vintage racing?
Got to take care of the boy first.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's taking care of himself pretty well.
Kinda.
I think Ken can tell you that story. but-
Kinda. Yeah, well, I mean, you've obviously cemented your own legacy in the history of Wiscasset Speedway, but how do you feel as a father watching your son etch his name in a short list of the greatest drivers in Wiscasset's history? The kids,
Don't ever say that in front of him.
no, I won't. And
He's going to see this.
don't allow him to watch
got a
this.
point there.
But, I mean, he's been at it for, 20 years now
He
himself?
started the Saturday after he turned 16, he started racing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And his next win, which I'm confident is still there in front of him, is win number 70. He got his 6th championship last year, which puts him second all time behind Morris Young. 2-time driver of the year. I mean, 4 straight modified titles. And he's a lot. I liken his driving
You're
style
right,
a
yeah.
lot to Chuck. It's his car says Mr. Smooth right under that number 1, and I think it's similar style to you. He races the whole race rather than the lap.
There's only one lap that pays.
Yeah.
That's
That's
right.
the last one.
That's right.
And we run on that paycheck that comes out of the pay window.
Yeah, that's what I had to do too.
Yep.
Always. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he's the one that has to go back to the shop and fix the car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all grew up like that.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, I know Stan helped me a lot before I
Yeah.
learned to do a lot of stuff. I know you guys went to him
Stan
and
was
do a lot.
instrumental with me too.
I like the story you told about when, I guess, St. Clair paved the track and you went to Stan complaining about everybody's on the bottom and
Yeah.
nobody can go on the outside. What did he say to you?
Yeah, well, I went up to him and I said, you just can't pass on the outside down there at Wiscasset. And he says, of course you can. And I said, you can't stand. I said, you go out there and you just lose positions. He goes, look, everybody's running on the bottom. You're all bottom feeders, he said. So you got to go, all the trash is in the second groove.
Yeah.
He said, you got to go out there and run 2 or 3 laps or 4 laps and clean the second groove off before you can race. So I took him at heart. So the next week I went down there and I jumped right out in the second groove after we run 5 or 6 laps. And sure enough, the first car goes by and the second car goes by and the third car goes about 3/4 of the way by. And gee, I gained a foot or so on him that lap. And then I gained a couple feet the next lap. And then, by golly, I passed everybody and went right to the lead.
That was some pretty good information.
It was
wasn't
very good information.
Yeah.
Stan
Yeah.
helped everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, Stan did help
was
everybody.
amazing.
Stan, the first 100 lapper that I ever won was at Unity, the Long John 100. And Andy Santerre had gone the year before in 1990. Santerre just dominated that race. I mean, he was really, really fast. Well, my engine was 3 years old. It was using oil and all that stuff. And Stan calls me up and he says, "You're coming up to the Long John?" And I says, "No, we don't have the money to run the Long John." I says, "The motor's tired and all that stuff." And he says, "You put that car together and you get your to Unity." Okay, Stan. So I go up and we get in the pits, and he comes over and he says, you need to put 25 pounds right there. And I did. And he says, now put that back up to the 4-inch ride height. And I did. And that car was a rocket. I didn't think we were going to qualify in the first heat. I started in the back, and I was behind a car from Oxford, and he was slow, but you just couldn't get by him. And when I finally got by, I started passing everybody. And I remember Dave Fector was out in the lead by about a straightaway when I finally got into second, and I ran him down in a hurry. And he saw me running the outside, so he immediately moves in the second groove thinking he's going to block me, and I blew by him on the bottom. And he comes up to me afterwards. He says, "Where did you get that motor anyhow?"
Old tired one that you had.
Yeah. So in that race, I didn't know it. I started on the pole, and as the race went on, I was about 2 car lengths from lapping Dave Fector when he was in 3rd place.
Wow.
And there was 2 cars in front of me before him, and they were running side by side, and I was kind of waiting for somebody to make a move so I could pass them. And the guy on the outside finally gets about 7/8 the way by, and I'm right behind him, and he cuts down on the guy and spins in front of me, and I hit him and shifted into second gear. Didn't, just bent up the right front a little bit, but not enough to hurt anything. Shifted in second gear and took off and never lost the lead. I was so far ahead of second place.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, Unity is a track. Everybody likes to have horsepower. Yeah, we say you don't have enough, but Unity is one of the tracks you could go with a good motor and a good handling car and win the race.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You didn't have to have a lot of motor at Unity. You had to have a good
sort of a
handling
power
car.
track.
But to be honest with you, you didn't have to have a lot of motor at Wiscasset either. If the car went through the corner really well,
Momentum.
it was
If it would
fast.
roll well, momentum through
Right.
the corner.
Right.
Yeah.
What got you into the modified class?
Working with Dell.
Okay.
Open wheels, that's the only way to go.
Yeah.
Race cars don't have fenders.
I drove an open wheel car at East Bay. I wish I'd have done it earlier. You see everything, it's all there in front of you. It's pretty nice.
I've driven them without fenders, but it's because I ripped them off.
So you were mentioning the Sizzler events earlier. You kind of like those, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah, you won a few of those.
Yeah, the Summer Sizzler series was, people scream about tracks cooperating these days. It was collaboration between Wiscasset, Speedway 95, and was it Spud or
It's Unity and Spud.
Yeah,
That's
all
nice.
4 of them.
All 4 of them.
yeah.
And that was a fun series.
You ran a race at every track, right?
2 races.
Two at every track. Yeah.
So for a change, there must have been plenty of cars everywhere when you were doing that.
Yes.
It was.
Yeah. And it was
Yeah.
The
fun.
crowd must have been, it has all the ingredients.
Yeah, when there
For
was
success.
a Sizzler race at another track, that wasn't another pro stock race scheduled against it,
Right,
so the
right,
guys
right.
could all travel.
Yeah.
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 And you could run the tires from,
From the track you raced at.
right.
Yeah.
If you wanted to run the Goodyears from Bangor, you could. You run McQuarrie's from Wiscasset at the time.
Unfortunately, it was pretty short-lived, but you won both of them, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
That
But
was,
we wanted to run the retread, though.
Yeah.
that was sort of like the good old days in the 70s with the Getty Opens or whatever. You could run your track tire. You
Yeah.
didn't have to have a different carburetor. Bear might put some weight on you or something. And plenty of cars and plenty of people. And you said it wasn't short, it was short-lived. I can remember coming home, and I don't know what time it was, what era it was, but Unity, Wiscasset, and Bangor all ran the same tire, but each track had a stamp on it, and you couldn't go to the next track
Right.
unless you bought another tire.
Right.
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 I'm not sure that helped anybody.
Yeah, that Summer Sizzler series, I won one of those races at Bangor.
Yeah.
And then I won one again at Wiscasset, running against Kenny.
Yeah, both
Kenny
you guys-
made a mistake in lap traffic, and I got by him. So
He has never let me forget
Nope.
that.
it's one of the few times I ever beat you.
You guys all have a history of winning a lot of races. So I'm going to ask them this question while it's early, because I know they probably won't answer it for a while. I've been getting all these private messages about how everybody likes hearing the guys from the past talking, and they enjoy the humor and Ken's questions. And finally, one of them said to me the other day, "When are you going to ask those guys how much they cheated?" You want to go first, Dale?
All I could get away with.
Pete, I always explain it this way. I'll hold up these 2 pieces of paper right here. Most track owners and most drivers want their rule book to be this thick. Thanks to people like Dale, they have to be this thick.
Well,
Statute of limitations run out, guys,
Yeah,
so you
it
can
did.
tell whatever story you want.
Not on some of it.
You're still racing.
That's your job as a car builder and driver is to find that gray area.
I can answer that question quite easily. But the only time I ever cheated, I didn't even know I was cheating, and that was when Stan had widened that clip, and I didn't know it. But I am very proud of the fact that I never got DQ'd in tech.
Can
Never
you polish his halo for him?
I know.
But I never did. I believed in racing fair. That was my thing.
Race car drivers would make good gangsters. I know nothing.
Oh, yeah, Schultz Amendment.
Don't know how that got on that car.
I know you don't believe me, but that's the truth. That is the truth.
I was cheating, but I didn't know it.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I did.
Home
And was that really cheating?
I don't know. I wasn't there. I only can take your word for it.
Like I say, I didn't even know that clip had been widened until after I had sold the car. So, and until after Travis Benjamin had wrecked it and they reclipped it, that's when Stan told me why there was a problem with it.
After all the good things you said about Stan, I'm going to lay this on him.
Hell yeah.
Well, Dale and I have had a lot of conversations about this when it comes to the rules that, you want a little bit of freedom to. That's where the ingenuity came from back in the early days.
Is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it all started.
He got that from Woodstock, free love.
Well, you and I had this conversation, Pete. A lot of times, I like to do things a little bit different than everybody else was. So, at Unity, the year that I won the championship up there in '88, everybody was running 60 series Cooper tires.
Said, yeah.
I was running 60 series Summits, and I was running 60 series on the right side, but I was running 70 series on the left. Nobody would do that, but that was what I was doing, and nobody could understand why I was doing it.
Why do you think that worked so good for you?
Back then.
Let me ask you different. What's the difference between a 70 and a 60 for anybody that's watching this?
Inch and a half a tire on the track.
Right. Well, that's a lot.
And that is a lot.
On the left. The width was on the left side.
Yeah, the left side tires with the 70 series.
I felt that's what you were going to say. I just wanted the people to understand they're going to watch this why you did that. And that makes all kinds of sense in the world. And I don't know why somebody else wouldn't do that once they saw you doing it.
Yeah. Also, in the Pro Stock one year, your rules, I think, was 66 and a half wide. Is that what it was? I was running 64. And running 64 inches wide, you could run a little bit less stagger, which it was hazard. I thought worked better.
Yeah.
But also on the scales, I could keep my car a little bit to the right, so I could kind of cheat the scales.
See, if you keep talking long enough.
Well, no, but the car,
but he didn't cheat, right?
The car wasn't overweight or anything like that. But if I'm giving up an inch, giving up an inch and a half on width, so I'm giving up a competitive advantage in a way.
Yeah.
So I had to take advantage of what I was doing. So anyhow, I used to steer the car onto the scales. So one night the kids were steering it on there, and I said, "No, we're going to back it back off and move it over here." And Buzzy goes, "Why are you doing that?" And I says, "Because I'm only 64 inches wide." And so the weight is right if I keep it 2 inches this way. Well, he would never let me do that again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was off center of the scales, basically.
I mean, the scales were set for a 66 and a half inch wide car, not a 64 inch wide car. Yeah. So I'd run the right tires on the way where the 66 and a half inch wide car would be, which put the left side tires in on the scale.
Left side was a little
So that
further
worked
to
in
the
your
right.
favor.
That would work in my
Would've made
favor.
the
That
right
was the
side heavier
advantage
and the left side
to
lighter.
doing things
Right.
different than somebody else.
So you're probably getting away with being light on the right side then.
Yeah, but if that's how it was working, but just what it is.
But
I didn't look at that as cheating.
That's the gray
You're
area
right.
we keep
You're right.
talking
You're
about.
absolutely right.
Right.
That's the gray area.
It is the gray area.
Yeah.
That's what Stan said. Oh, you're supposed to build a car not by what the rules say, but what it doesn't,
It doesn't say.
It
Yeah.
doesn't say, right?
Remember that, Ken?
The promoter in me is cringing.
It should be.
Yeah, every time you go across the scales, set over just as far as you can, set in the car, cross your legs, the whole thing.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
So I did that in an
Yeah.
act race, probably the first or second one I ever went to.
Yeah.
Got out to the window like that.
Make sure you throw the steering wheel up on the right-hand side of the car.
Absolutely.
Helmet,
With the gloves, the helmet.
Yeah.
And the old car that was running the scales for ACT back then looked right at me and said, "Young man, I'm going to strap your Under that seat, put your helmet, your glove, and the steering wheel on if you move again.
Yeah, they did after a while. They
Oh,
made you
yeah.
have your helmet had to be
Oh, yeah.
in your lap and the steering wheel had to be.
That's why we had a leaded Pepsi can. It weighed about-
I've
it
seen
was hard
leaded
to do. It was-
radios and
it
all
was-
that stuff.
It was hard to do that without melting the coloring and fill the Pepsi can up, but it weighed about 15 pounds. It was huge.
Yeah.
Did either of you guys run the 250 at all?
Yeah, I love that race. Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you have some success?
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of the fact that we were such a small budget team, and I've got an 8th, a 9th, a 14th, a 15th, a 17th.
Yeah.
In the last place because I blew the engine about 30 laps in.
Well,
But
that's a tough race any given time.
well, and back then there was 90 to 100 cars trying to qualify. So just to qualify was a victory to me. So
Yeah.
just to get in the race, but I love that. But where else would I have gotten a chance to race against Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch, Kurt Busch, Ricky Craven,
Right.
That's right.
Kevin Harvick, J.J. Yaley.
Yeah.
That place, I know it's dwindled a little bit in recent years, but in the 80s, we came up in the early 80s, it'd be 120 cars in the
Yeah,
pits.
Exactly.
yeah.
The heat races would have 40 cars in them.
How about you? You must have taken a swing at it a few times. Yeah.
Yeah, Kenny had some good runs in the
Yeah.
250.
But I think we got fifth twice on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a
One
year.
year I was running Mike Rowe down and I could see him getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm catching him. All of a sudden he starts to disappear. I'm like, either you picked up a pace or I got a problem. Had a popper of it in the right front.
That's frustrating, you know.
That is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been through some of that.
Exactly.
The year Ellis won it, I was second coming. They had an article in Circle Track. We were running 0.2 of a second quicker coming through traffic than he was leading.
Yeah.
It was time to pit. We got into pits and we couldn't get to our pit stall. It was blocked off. Cars were piled up in the pits.
Yeah.
Had to go back out and start from the rear on the same tires and got back to fifth, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a humbling race, no matter how
sure
good
is.
this
Yeah, it
place
is.
will bring you to your
Well,
knees. Really.
I always said I could retire from racing happy because Denny Hamlin and I started one of the heat races. Denny was on the outside of me and I was on the pole and I got him on the start. I was better everywhere except a little bit off turn 2, so he's getting into the back of me off turn 2, pushing me sideways. Well, at that point, I'm not going to give him the bottom. I don't care what he does. And he didn't want to go around me. I figured if you're that good, drive around me. So he's got me sideways all the way down the backstretch because he's pushed in so hard on the left rear. And I'm thinking, I'm going to wreck us both.
Good.
So when I touched the brake, because we cut the bumper bars off, so the rear quarter he was into me so hard, the right front was right up against the bumper bar. When I touched the brake to get into turn 3, it spun him. It wasn't. He was giving me the finger and shaking his fist. And I come in the pits and Sam Session goes, "How do you spin people out when they're behind you? I want to know how to do that." And I figured I'd retire happy because I beat Denny Hamlin.
There you go.
Well, you had some good runs there. You both did.
Yeah.
And I used to tell people, if you're a racer and you're running it, you got a car for that class. I don't care where you are in the country. You got to come try it.
Yeah,
If you're
absolutely.
a racer at heart, you got to
Yeah.
come try it. Did you go over there and try any of those divisions?
No, never had money enough.
Yeah. Well, you're right about that.
Yeah.
Cushman invited me a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. I hadn't been there since '91. I can remember showing up, and there were 600 campers there. And supposedly, there was 2 tire machines going wide open. They had several divisions. They had mounted over 900 tires already.
Yeah.
And they were $186 a piece for the Sportsman tires. So
Yeah. I knew if I went, I wouldn't have been able to compete.
Yeah.
well, I think you make a good point. I think a lot of people feel that way, but I think a lot of people went just to see if they could make it and be part of it, you know?
Yeah. The first couple of years that we went, I went with KDT, and they'd buy 6 tires. Well, we'd practice on those tires on Saturday and then try to qualify Sunday. And you couldn't do that. And so in '97 was the last year that KDT was involved. They wanted to get out of it, so they gave me the car. It's my engine anyhow. They just wanted to get done totally. So at that point, I had a really young crew. I had my 18-year-old son, Kevin and Dennis's nephew. He was 18 and 19 years old. Jason.
Yeah, Jason.
He might have been 20 or 21. I had a really young crew.
So
but
you
Pretty
they
in
were
that
doing-
area.
Basically,
they were doing a great job.
a training session,
That's right,
basically.
Basically, but
Yeah.
they were great. They did a good job preparing that car. It was awesome. But I talked to Stan about it, and Stan says, you can't go there and do that. He says, you've got to have a set of tires for the heat race. a set of tires for the Consi and a set of tires for the last chance race. And if you don't do that, you're not going to qualify. And we always qualified after that.
Yeah, you gotta, depends what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
Obviously you want it all, but yeah, you have to buy tires.
Right.
I can remember we used to buy 10 in the early days, which was a pretty good
we
amount of
bought
tires,
14.
10 and 12.
We bought 12 so that we had a set for each thing and then 2 spares.
Nobody buys less than 24 now.
No, we went
Not
to
even
those
might be the
races.
rule 24, that's all you can buy.
Mike Rowe had
Yeah.
40 of them.
Well, you make a good point, because I asked Jay, I said, how many tires you buy? And he said, 24 is all we can buy. And I'm sitting there saying, all you can buy. I thought that was plenty. And I said, man, my big mouth, well, why is that? And he mentioned, he
they
said,
made a
because of
rule,
roll
yeah.
buying 40 one year, if that's accurate.
Oh,
Yeah, it is. Well,
36,
Johnny
nothing
Clark bought that
uncommon.
many too.
Yeah. Must
They
have been
tried
one-
to get Johnny Clark to give some back because they were running out of tires. And he says, that's their problem. They didn't buy him soon enough. He wouldn't give them back.
So was that a year for a lousy tire or something? And when you put new
Yeah.
tires on, you
Yeah.
just picked up that much?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
I always like to ask guys, who were your early influences? Like when you guys got into racing, who were the ones that, like, oh my God, I'm out on the track with this guy?
Simple. Bill Bailey.
Oh, God. Yeah.
yeah.
Love Bill Bailey.
Yep.
Yeah, I met him late in his life in some of the reunions at the track, but he was an intimidating presence at that time, meeting him as an older gentleman. But I've heard so many stories about how intimidating he was on the track.
Oh, yeah. I met him a few times down the back straight away. I saw him at one of the 45th anniversary.
Yes, that was it.
He says, you remember that time I put you into that cement over there? I said, Bill, which time are you talking about? Yeah. But he was a nice guy, though.
Yeah. How about you, Chuck?
All of them. I mean, yeah, everybody I raced with made me a better racer. It was just all another challenge. I mean, Stan and Ralph and Mike Rowe and, you know, Jeff Stevens.
Oh, yeah.
All those guys, they were, if you could race with those guys, you were,
Yeah.
and every one of them made me better. Dave St. Clair, I've said that to Dave, but you know, boy, you had to work for it to get around Dave. You were going to have some yellow paint on your cab. You know, he never wrecked you. But he just raced you hard.
He raced. It was a race. You race hard.
Exactly.
Simple as that. You're
yeah,
right. He did
and they all made me a better racer. So I can't say that I was intimidated. Bobby Coburn said to me one time, we were at Oxford, because I had bought his car, and was out there with, it might have been 250 time, and he says, Jeebus, doesn't that intimidate you to be out there with Dave Dion and they all? I says, they're just another race car, Bobby. I says, you know, I'm a race car driver. And
Right.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any kind of like pinch me moment when you were out there, like, oh my God, I'm out here with these guys. So,
well, I mean, Denny Hamlin, but
Yeah.
what the heck, I got the best of him. That's right.
Exactly.
How about you, Kenny?
I mean, a lot like Chuck just said. I mean, Stan, Ralph, Pete back in the day.
Yeah.
You know, I remember going younger. Before my racing started, I'd see you at Wiscasset, you and Stan. And,
But the era that you guys started, it was Stan and Ralph and Rowe. And,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Jeff Stevens, that was a good one. When you were on the NEPSA tour, I believe Stevens was there too.
he
right?
was,
yeah,
him and I
he
were
Yeah.
actually racing for the
But
championship.
you guys, to step up, there was some cream of the crop there, so to speak.
Yeah,
that
they
could-
made you better.
yeah.
Who
You
was
only
your,
get as good as the people you race against.
who was your toughest competition that you raced? You had some epic battles with Scott Chubbuck in the early pro stock
Scott
days.
and I, Stan and I had a lot of good. Mike and I had some really. I mean, they come right down to the end.
Yeah.
Ralph too.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one lap. Ralph led 149 laps in Canada. He didn't lead 150, and he finished second. But I literally got him at the line by that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, but I had to hound him the whole race.
Yeah. Who was your toughest guy to race against?
Oh gosh.
Kenneth?
No, like he's you know, Jeff Stevens, Mike Rowe, Stan.
Yeah.
They all, Scott was tough to race against at Wiscasset.
In the limited division, who was tough? I mean, you raced there a long time, raced some good people.
Yeah.
Steve Nelson was tough
Yeah.
at Unity,
Yeah.
and Steve
Steve
really made
was.
me step my game up.
Yeah.
He's the one that I beat 6 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
I remember that yellow number 111 in the front of the pack a lot.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely,
Pee Wee
Pee-wee.
Knight. Dave Fecto was a
Yeah.
tough
Yeah.
competitor. Larry Jalanis was a tough competitor, and so was Kevin Durgan. I
Yeah.
mean,
Was Chibok racing in that division when
yeah,
you were in it?
Chabak was in
Darren
the
Ripley
division when I
was,
was.
yeah.
Then Darren Ripley was in the limited division. He was tough.
Stevie
They had
Reno.
good equipment.
Yeah.
Stevie Rennie,
Yeah.
Darren Bucknam too. He was in
Darren
there with
Bucknam
them.
was a good racer.
Yeah.
So Dale, when you were in the beginning of stages and you were moving up a couple divisions, obviously you didn't do what these guys did. You went and did something else. Who were the tough guys you were racing? A lot of these younger guys that were learning the ropes must have been in those divisions when you were there.
Did you race against Teddy Polino?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Teddy
There you go.
Polino, Kenny
Kenny
Lund.
Lund would have been there.
Yeah,
Teddy Polino.
My first race, I started 22nd in 42 cars.
Jeez, my God.
Scared to death. I mean, it didn't matter if you stepped on the gas or not. You were going.
Yeah, you go because you don't want to get run
You get
over.
run over.
choice.
Good point. Yeah.
My first practice, I went out there by myself, and I couldn't figure out why I was by myself. Bill Bailey and Ken Siggers had set it up with everybody that they went out behind me, and Bill got behind me, and Ken Siggers got on the outside of me, and they just kept going faster and faster and faster. They had what they call sportsman cars.
Yeah.
I had a hobby car. I was on tires that wide. They had slicks. And they just kept making me go faster and faster and faster until I spun myself out in one turn.
Trying to get away.
Trying to do something. I didn't know what I was going to do.
Was Bill in that big Plymouth with the wings on it there? The Chrysler or whatever it was?
No, it was I'm trying to think of it. It was the 55 Chevy or the Plymouth. Yeah, you're right. It was the Plymouth.
That 55 Chevy became Stan's
Yes.
Chevelle strong number one. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Bill, he bought it at the end of the year.
Yep.
Yeah. I think he and Davo got together to go. Stan had the car and Davo had a motor out of his modified, the 301, and I think they went to one of those Getty Opens, and the motor went to, the crankshaft came out of it, and Davo being Davo, I think it had a 1010 crank in it. I don't know, he's cleaned the crank up. He had standard bearings, so that was 10 thousandths too
Yep.
big. He mic'd stuff in the pit area. I don't know if it was matchbooks, covers, or leather or whatever, and he cut pieces to put behind the bearings to put that motor back together. On that trailer, he had that ramp over trailer, and he ran it in a heat race. It didn't stay together, but who else would do that?
I watched him drill a crankshaft down at Beach Ridge one night.
That's
I watched him do it at Unity. He snuck up there with a 400 and didn't realize they were externally balanced. And he put his 350 flywheel on, and it shook him out of the seat practicing. He's up on that trail, and he had the pan off it and the transmission cover off it, and he was drilling the crankshaft and the flywheel, trying to balance it in the pit area with a drill.
yep.
Wow.
Right in the dirt. I mean,
Matty Butler was talking about that the other day when I was taking the tranny down.
Well, time is winding down. I know with these guys.
We were just starting to have fun.
Yeah, I know. I don't want it to end here. I do have a couple other questions I just want to throw out. Do you guys feel like you could race still today? Do you think you still got it? I mean, your son is racing pro stocks now at Wiscasset. What do you think about that?
It's fun. I mean, I enjoy. I like to see him progress.
Yeah.
As far as missing the seat, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's still hard for me to stand there and watch, and it always will be.
Yeah, because you're not too far detached from it. I mean,
No, but so many times I wish he didn't have a car seat in there because I can't get in his seat. And I swear to God, it's like this wide. But I've come close to putting another seat in and trying it.
yeah, yeah. How about you? Did you just know it was time? It was time.
It was money that ran me out of it. It got so that it wasn't fun. And, you know, when we were running up front all the time, you have plenty of crew, everybody wants to help and all that stuff. And money-wise, we couldn't keep up any longer. We couldn't buy the tires. We couldn't afford the shocks. We couldn't, you know. And the last year that we raced Pass, it was my bride and my son Adam and I trying to push the car through the pits and trying to get the tires ready. We were running back in 15th to 20th. And I just said, you know, this isn't fun anymore.
Sometimes the sport makes the decision for you.
It made the decision for me. And I really missed it. And I liked every track I ever raced on. There wasn't a track that I didn't like. But Oxford was really, to go to the 250, it still really bothered me. I felt, boy, I could really still do that with them out there. But not at this point. It's a young man's sport. There's no way that my reflexes could be as fast as they are now. And
Now, if you'd stayed with it and kept doing it, it'd be different. But
Right.
when you're young and you stop for a year and come back, it's one thing. But when you're our age and stop for 5 years, 10 years, it's you're basically done, because there is some kind of edge you maintain because you're always thinking about racing.
Yes.
It's always an adrenaline deal, and then when you stop, it goes away, and that's like you got to try to recapture that. And I don't think it's that easy when you're older.
And you're in a kind of a unique situation too, where you gave up driving, but that was quite a while ago. But you've lived vicariously through your son Adam and the likes of Mike Moody and some of the young drivers that you've brought up. So you still have your hands in it as much as you always have.
I got out of it for a while when Adam was born.
Yeah.
And just there was other costs that came in with Adam.
Yeah.
And so
kids.
yeah, kids, houses. So I got out of it then, and I found it fairly easy to come back when I came back with Adam. But Rich and Vanessa let me go over there and play whenever I want to. We have a thing that if I build a new car, I drive it first.
Yeah.
I get the first laps.
Yeah.
And so they let me go over there and they let me make the first laps in the new car and stuff. And it's still fun, but I know I don't belong out there.
Yeah.
Now, when you put that other 20 cars around that fun moment, it's going to go away. Isn't it?
I didn't think there'd ever be life after racing, but I found, the camping thing isn't too bad. My bride chased me around for a long time racing and stuff like that, and this is her time and time with the grandchildren, and so.
But that is a fair question to ask everybody.
It
and how
is, absolutely.
I think anybody that's, and these three guys fit this criteria, that's had any success, especially to the level these guys have, you're always going to miss it because it was your life.
Yeah. I still, when I go to the 250, we go in the pit so we can talk with all the guys and visit with everybody.
I remember asking you, Dale, one time, and in Andy Austin's Open Trailer podcast, you said, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have racing.
Yeah. I can tell you I probably wouldn't even be alive if it wasn't for racing.
Well, evidently you're never going to know because you haven't stopped.
And I don't plan on it.
Well, Dave St. Clair, I talked with him last summer down there at the races, and he says, it's what I love to do. I still love it.
He just turned 75, and he said he's going to be running the Coastal 200 again this May. So
How we're doing.
Yeah, because my son is Adam's crew chiefing for Jeremy Glazier.
Yeah.
So Adam, he's still very involved in it, stuff like that. And my grandson Noah might end up racing eventually. I don't know.
Yeah, he was pretty good with a go-kart.
Yeah, he was.
So.
He's a good little driver. So.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, guys, I always try to give you guys a chance to mention a couple of names that you feel are synonymous with, important to how your career, started, finished. Who were the people that really were there with you through it all? Who are the most important people when it comes to your racing career that you have a chance to thank?
It's hard to pick one because there's been so many.
That's really.
But, Kenny Beasley always gave me a ride in his cars. Terry Oliveri gave me rides in his cars. There was always something out there to drive. Somebody had something.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I got to thank Richard and Vanessa.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done it all.
Yeah. Boy, they've done a fantastic
what they have done
job.
with that place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you had a lot. Looks according to this, you had a hand in a lot of things.
Yeah,
too.
that's a whole nother episode we could talk about. But
I don't know if everybody knows what a great community guy you are for your community and everything around you. You do a lot of good things. Everybody's going to call me. You're going to call me a liar now.
But everybody talks about the Sable Wiscasset Raceway thing.
Yeah.
And my name got hung on that thing. But there was a lot of people. I mean, people came out of the woodwork for that thing.
After your speech at the Hall of Fame, you're not going to convince anybody of anything other than what we just said. You were a participant in all of it.
I told him before we came in here that his Hall of Fame speech up there was the most inspiring speech I've ever listened to.
A lot of people still talk about it.
Yeah.
and it just shows the passion that you have for the sport. That summed it all up in that speech. So
You represent us all well.
yeah.
Yes.
Thank
Never
you.
thought I'd be saying that.
How about you, Chuck?
Well,
Who you want to thank?
yeah, it would be impossible to thank everybody that helped me out along the way. But, Reggie Harris, when I first started racing in the Limited, he was there every night. He went to every race with me. He was a real big supporter, a real big help. And, of course, Dan Reserve, Kevin and Dennis Downs from KDT Racing, they got me into pro stock. and got that started. That was awesome. But my crew, my children, Adam, as a young man, he did a great job crew chiefing that car. Was probably one of the best spotters out there when he was spotting for me. Terry and you know, it's just the crew. It was awesome. My daughter, she was bound determined. I could still see her in the pit. She was going to change a tire with the tire irons, and she was bound determined she could do it.
Yeah.
And by golly, she did. You know, the kids were always there, and
Yeah.
probably, I don't know if it's because they loved racing, but it's because they wanted to be with Dad. So
Yeah, that's good.
Either way, it worked out well.
yeah.
Exactly.
Good.
How about you, Kenny?
Well, like everybody said, that list is so long. I mean, my mother and father for getting me into it in the first place.
Yeah.
Because back in the 60s, Racehole was racing at Unity.
Right? That's an
And,
old
I
name.
think
My
it was-
word.
Yeah, that's a late August, early September. In 1964, he won his first race. I wasn't born until November. So my mother was bouncing up and down on the grandstand, you know, cheering him on. So we figured that probably got the whole thing started right there. So up through the years, but Dale, you know, when I first started, he went and got my very first race car. And dragged it home, and you know, any help I've needed. Jamie, same way. I mean, how many years later is this? You know, 40 plus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know,
right. Racing does build relationships.
Oh, it,
It
sure
does.
does.
Yeah.
We don't take care of the kids aren't going to take care of racing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big things that we take away from the sport when we leave it, or you know, when we're away from the track. It's the relationships that we built.
You
and stuff.
make so many friends
Exactly.
racing. It's
Oh,
as much
it's-
about the racing community and all the friendships
Yeah.
and relationships that you build over the years that make it as special as it is. Absolutely.
Yeah. It amazes me when you walk in and I'll run into people I haven't seen in 20 years. Run into them, shake hands, start talking. That's 10 minutes ago. Honest to God.
Feels like it was, like
Just like it is right now.
Right. Exactly.
Well, like I said, I feel we've gone past our time limit by a ways. We thank the guys for their patience here. I know it could go on for a lot longer.
Oh, yeah.
You guys were telling stories when I walked in the door, and there probably will be for a while after we're done. I did want to mention, I haven't mentioned this in a previous episode. We mentioned it briefly here. If you want to hear some more really good interviews through the Maine Vintage Race Car Association, the previous president, Andy Austin, did a really good podcast called the Open Trailer Podcast. And
Right.
you can go onto our website at mainvintagerace.org to access those podcasts. Dale is on one of them, Scott Jabak,
Scott's
a
on
lot
it,
of the
yeah.
greats, Kelly Moore.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great interviews on there.
Yeah.
We're going to continue with this series. We're going to record some more over the summer, and I don't know how many you'll see during the course of the racing season, but we're going to ramp them back up in the off season again and continue to do this. So I wanted to thank you guys for giving up part of your day to come in here to do this. Pete?
Happy to do it.
I'd like to thank him too. I knew this would be an easy one.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you guys for inviting us. It's been awesome.
Yeah.
We'll hold it over you for a while.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh, yeah.
I can't wait.
So as I said, we hope you've enjoyed this edition of Vintage Racers Roundtable. You can find out more about the Maine Vintage Race Car Association by going to our website at mainvintagerace.org. You can find out about becoming a member and find out about our mission to help present and preserve the history of racing in the state of Maine. And it is vast and it is deep. There's a lot of stuff there. And you guys can help us by supporting Maine Vintage Race Car Association. Thank you to Larry Seidlinger and the crew here again at Lincoln County TV, our guests Dale Chadbourne, Chuck LaChance, and Kenny Wright, my co-host Pete Silva, racing historian Ken Lane for all his hard work, and Vanessa Jordan from Wiscasset for providing lunch today. So we really appreciate everybody's time and hope to see you next time again here on Vintage Racers Roundtable.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it very much. It was fun.
It's been fun.
Elevation Station, 132 Waldoboro Road in Jefferson, Maine. We have premium medicinal cannabis and accessories to get you on track. Elevation Station, 132 Waldoboro Road in Jefferson, Maine. All aboard!